and director were like intentionally making the Christ figure parallels and like the Christian faith believing Jesus is God, which of course you and I do. But like, I don't know if they were, but to me it was like a really powerful, like, yeah.
Well, see,
He's a Christ figure.
This
Jesus
is
is
something that
God.
I think that I'm gonna get into over and over again. I think that even if they weren't intentionally doing it, in stories like that, you kind of can't help but do it.
Yeah, and
Because
actually that was another thing I wanted to talk about, but finish what you were saying first.
yeah, well, because I was actually talking in the last episode that I recorded with Aaron Welty. He was talking a lot about C.S. Lewis in a conversation that he had with Tolkien about mythology and how basically like the Christian story, yeah, it's a myth, but it's a myth that happens to be true. And it's a story that resonates in us so deeply and on such a profound level that we just can't help, even if we don't believe in like this literal series of events, like we can't stop ourselves from continuing to tell this story over and over again about redemption, about a fall and a sacrifice and a redemption and a rebirth.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk about, and I can't say it any better than you just did. So,
So what was there anything like that was just really cool that like grabbed you when you were watching the movie this time?
well, like I had hinted at before, touched on before, Loki is an awesome character.
Loki
He's
is an awesome
he is one of
character.
my favorite villains of all time, and you know from talking to me that I love villains that have some character depth to them.
Right.
Villains that make you sort of understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love those kind of villains. I love anti-heroes, like vigilantes and heroes that are like people that like aren't all good
Mm-hmm.
and aren't all bad. And like Loki, as we'll see you'll see in later Marvel movies, it's like he's not always evil. Like
Right.
he's not always like he can be really, really evil and doing really bad things and then turn around and join the good guys for a while. I love characters like that.
There's a really fun little one-off story in Michael J. Straczynski's run on Spider-Man where Loki teams up with Spider-Man to save like a daughter that he managed to have at some point. And like they're just kind of hanging out and bopping around New York. Like I forget exactly what it is they're trying to do, but it's hilarious. And like Spider-Man's eating a hot dog and like Loki has something funny to say about that. And that whole run of Michael J. Straczynski on Spider-Man, some people don't love it because it introduced this idea of like the totemic nature of Spider-Man's power that there's this idea that the spider was trying to give him a set of spider powers before it got hit with the radiation. Like we've been on the wrong end of like the chicken and egg equation with the spider powers, and always assumed that it was because the spider was irradiated that he gained spider powers from the spider. But this run introduced the idea that he was sort of like destined to have them, and that he's part of a whole line and a whole other sort of realm of like bearers of totemic power.
Interesting.
And yeah, it is really interesting, and it played into a whole big event here from a couple of years ago now called Spider-Verse, where since he's a bearer of this totemic power, there's this race of villains called the Inheritors who feed on this totemic power, and they like stalk the multiverse, like looking for these different bearers of power and feeding off of them, and it's really cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, so I loved going back and watching this a second time, knowing who Loki is, like from other movies and like this one, knowing the type of person he is and being able to see like him shaping the events at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, like you wouldn't necessarily know that if this is your first time watching Thor and the first time you've been introduced to Loki. How pretty much the only reason that Thor went to
Jotunheim.
Jotunheim, yes, I was trying to think of it. I almost said Jotengard, but that doesn't. Was because Loki was putting the idea in his head. Like Thor had like a leaning that way, but he probably wouldn't have gone against Odin's orders unless Loki wasn't there talking to him, pretending to sympathize and suggesting, oh, well, the only way you could fix it is if you were to go to Jotunheim yourself. But that's,
that's ridiculous.
And Thor's looking at Thor looks like he's going to do it. And he's like, but you can't violate Odin's orders. And it's like, that's exactly what Loki wanted him to do.
Right. Yeah.
It's just, I love that they developed the characters so much like that. And as an aside, did you know, I don't know if you knew this, I thought it was hilarious when I heard it. I saw an interview with Tom Hiddleston, who I'm sure most of our viewers know plays Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That and this was actually like Tom Hiddleston was relatively unknown until he started doing these Marvel movies, and I think he's fantastic.
He is,
and
fantastic.
Apparently a bunch of other people do too, because they've literally named themselves the Hiddlestoners, like his fan club, and I thought funny. That was hilarious. And another aside about Tom Hiddleston is, I haven't seen the movie, but did you know he played Hank Williams.
I did know that.
In a movie about Hank Williams' life. And not only that, but he was the one singing and playing the guitar, doing all the songs. And not only that, but he had only been playing guitar for like 3 months before they started shooting the movie.
That's amazing.
He literally learned how to play guitar to do that role.
That's really cool. See, and Tom Hiddleston is an amazing actor, and I want to see that movie. When I saw the trailer for it, I was pretty excited, and I want to see it, but I haven't had a chance to.
Yeah, I've heard it's decent. Like a lot of people liked it, and there were some pretty critical reviews of it. But I mean, when you've got now I'm gonna stick my foot in my mouth at some point. I was gonna say when you have a British actor playing Hank Williams, I mean, it could be a little bit shaky.
Right. Although a Southern accent is like linguistically, like surprisingly similar to a British accent.
I've heard that before from other people, and I think it's probably right, which is also interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my whole spiel on Loki, and I just more connected to Loki, because this was something I wanted to briefly touch on too, and I know I've told you this before, but I think it's so great and hilarious that all of the listeners need to know about it. If you guys don't know who Ryan North is, you need to find out. Like, just Google him. He's my favorite writer. He's kind of comedic. He writes dinosaur comics. He's done it for over 10 years. But he also writes Dinosaur Comics is a webcomic. And what's hilarious is he wanted to do comics, but he can't draw. So he successfully made a comic that's been running for like 15 years, where it's literally the same drawings over and over.
Yes.
It's the same 6 panels every time, and he just changes the words. And that's just a testament, I think, to his creativity in writing, is that he could do that successfully for so long. And it's still funny. It's still interesting. So, I mean, if you want to find that, search for Dinosaur Comics. The actual website is quants.com, but you'll find it.
We can actually drop a link into the show notes. Okay,
cool. But more interestingly, recently he was asked by Marvel to write Squirrel Girl, which came out a year or two ago.
It's been running for a while.
Admittedly, I'm super behind on Squirrel. I have a subscription to it. I have like a stack of unopened Squirrel Girl comics, and that's not saying anything about the quality of the comic. That's saying things about the quality of my, like, the way I spend my time. Like, it's all negatives on me. Like, and maybe it's not a negative, but I haven't taken the time to catch back up. It's one of those things where I was reading it and then I probably started, like, playing video games too much again, and it fell by the wayside, and then it's like, oh, I need to catch up on that. Not that it would be a bad thing, but it's like I need to, like, you know, have a block of time to really get into it. And that's the wrong way to manage your time. But that's what I end up doing sometimes. But anyway, there's a fantastic story arc in the early Squirrel Girl comics that involve Thor. Well, it involves Odin's son, because as you comic geeks know, the current Thor is not Thor as we knew him. It's actually
He's become unworthy.
Female Thor. Somehow he became unworthy. Have they revealed officially who the female character is?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's been known for a while. And for anybody who knows Thor, of course, there's only one person who it could possibly have been, and everybody knew it all the time.
She's worthy. She has the hammer. She has Thor's powers.
But the interesting thing about Jane Foster is that I think for some reason the powers are giving her cancer. So basically she's dying of the Thor power.
Oh, that's sad. So I might have misled earlier when I said it was just Odinson. Actually, Thor, Odinson, and Loki are all in this story arc together. Mm-hmm. And Squirrel Girl, of course. And Squirrel Girl's awesome, hilarious roommate, who I can't remember her name right now. But but the funniest thing is, so her roommate, somebody, Whitehead. I know her last name's Whitehead. But Squirrel Girl's in college. No, it's not.
I know.
No. So Squirrel Girl's college roommate, shortly into the series, spoilers, like, finds out that Squirrel Girl's Squirrel Girl. And so she's in on it, and her roommate happens to be kind of a geek, and she's a huge fan of Thor comics and of Thor in general. And she has written fan comics. She also loves cats, and she's written a fan comic called Cat Thor. And, like, we don't see Cat Thor, like, in the comics. Like, we see maybe her drawings laying around sometimes. But getting back to Loki in this particular is playing, like, the perfect anti-hero once again. A giant demonic squirrel beast has been set loose on Earth from Asgard, and the other cool thing is it's a new character in the Marvel Universe, but it's tied in to Norse mythology once again, which I always think that's awesome. So there's actually a squirrel demon in Norse mythology,
right,
that runs up and down the world tree and, like, puts malevolent thoughts in people's heads to make them do bad things. And so this squirrel gets loose on Earth, or Midgard, you know, as they call it, and Thor has to do something about it. And in the course of the plot, this is going to be spoilers. So if any of you are going to, like, don't want to be spoiled on Squirrel Girl, like, you're going to read it, it's close to the end of our episode. You could maybe stop here.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe not. Maybe that's not something to encourage John's viewer or listeners to do.
No, that's fine, because we'll be here when you get back. Go read Squirrel Girl and then come back.
Yeah. So, and it's right near the beginning of the Squirrel Girl series. And so at one point, Nancy Whitehead, it might not even be Whitehead, it's White something, I know that. Nancy Whitehead goes to Asgard. She's super pumped about it. She meets Loki, and she's like, "Oh, I'm a super huge fan of some of your work." And this was after, like, I think Thor: The Dark World had come out, and the Avengers movie, of course, had come out before that. So in, like, the Dark World, Loki does some good things. So I think that's what, you know, she was referring to, at least from my knowledge of Marvel. She was referring to that, probably other things in the comics too. But Loki kind of takes a liking to Nancy because she's kind of sarcastic and, you know, doesn't take crap from people. And so and